Coming up on this week's episode of the Real Lives podcast with Radu Paltineanu.
You have to know the fact that I left with 900 Canadian dollars in my pocket when I started out to do this journey. Realities, you get to understand things from very different points of view. You just extract yourself from that mainstream society. Another time I was thinking of marrying a girl, and when that thing didn't work out, I came back to the idea of bike touring, seeing more of the world. But of course, the journey is the most important one. The destination is only there to guide you through that journey. I thought it would take me 9 months, and I would cover only 24,000 kilometers. Just by the look of it, I knew he was a dangerous person. He has this knife on his hand, and he tells me, "Oh, come and get it."
Just before we get into the episode, I want to say a big welcome to the new edition of the podcast, the Real Lives podcast, which aims to speak to real people to tell the real stories behind what they do. Now, this change came about due to the fact that I didn't feel that Quantum told the real story of what the podcast was about and the kinds of people I wanted to speak to. So, big change. Everything's changed and it's for the better. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Radu Paltineanu. You'll find his links down below. Also remember to like, subscribe, share the podcast with anyone who may be interested, as that's the only way we can grow the podcast. So thank you all for the support and I hope you enjoy. Radu, you spent 3 years and 3 months cycling from Dead Horse, Alaska to Ushuaia, is it?
Ushuaia. Or Ushuaia. In Spanish, that's what they call it, Ushuaia.
Okay, so in Argentina, which was the equivalent to about 35,000 kilometres, you also travelled 3,000 plus kilometres across New Zealand and then cycled 15 plus thousand kilometres across Australia. So the first question that I wanted to ask you was, what is your why behind all of this?
Oh, it's probably very diverse why, I would say. First of all, I've always been close to nature since I was a little kid. I grew up in a town in Romania that was close to the Carpathian Mountains, and I would take all these strolls and I'll do all these nature walks all around my hometown. So I've always been close to nature, and I've always been curious to see what's beyond the limit of my hometown, what's beyond my country, and what's beyond my continent. And there's also a lust for, adrenaline. I would call that the adrenaline of the unknown. Yeah. That's another big why, because, I know that by taking a certain path or by doing a certain expedition or a certain adventure, I never really know what's gonna happen around the corner. And that's part of what I called, or that is the adrenaline of the unknown. And there's a genuine curiosity to see the world and see it in a very adventurous and in a very unique way. I'm not very interested in motorized trips because I know it doesn't expose me to the same level of or to the same depth of things, and and it always feels good to be out there and do all these adventures. It's just I wouldn't be able to pinpoint one single reason why. There's many, but the adrenaline of the unknown, as I call it, is probably the biggest factor that plays into the why here.
So let's take it back to when you were a kid, and so during that time, what was sort of if you could pinpoint a moment that sort of pushed you down this path of exploration and adventure, what would it be?
Just curiosity. I remember I was 10 years old, and I would take the train and go 60 kilometers away from my hometown to the next city, and to my family and to all my friends and my colleagues at the time at my primary school. That seemed just crazy, doing that. But I realized very soon that was something that I love doing, just seeing what's around, what's beyond the lines that people draw, because we live, in a world that is dominated by borders, by, different limits that we we grow up with, you know. So I was always curious to see what's beyond there. And you know, I grew up with my grandparents in Romania, and my grandfather was a big inspiration in, you know, going and doing all these nature walks. You know, just going picking up mushrooms or medicinal plants. It's very usual actually in Romania to do that, especially back in the 90s. You know, it was very common to see people doing that, and so I grew up with knowledge of the local plants, with the knowledge of the local fauna, with the knowledge of the local mushrooms, you know, and just, you know, just being out there in nature, it was so rewarding, you know, because it's, you know, I think when you're a kid, everything is new for you, right?
Yeah.
So everything is exciting. But, you know, as you grow older and older, you kind of like try to fit into some patterns and into routine, so that excitement goes away. Whereas nature, or taking these walks and later on adventures in nature, provides you that excitement. So there's always something new that awaits you around the corner. You don't know exactly what. You hope for the best, you know. But, you know, I don't mind having so-called negative experiences, you know, because that are part of the overall adventure. So anything that comes around the corner is a surprise and is providing you that excitement that most people don't really get to have in their everyday life because of routine. You know, routine is the one that kills all of that excitement. So, yeah.
Routine is a scary thing. It's, for me, I have like this push and shove relationship with routine, in the sense that I need it. Like, I really require it for my peak performance in whatever I do. I need routine because it allows me to just perform at my best constantly. But also, so like, I've recently started what you would call your typical 9 to 5, and that's scary for me, because that's one thing that's, I don't know why, but as a kid when I grew up, it's always scared me. But I don't know, for performance I really need it, but then for work I think that's not what works for me. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
I think sometimes that's where we lose it, and that's what I've come to realize, is that, you know, routine isn't necessarily in the 9 to 5 or that kind of route through work. Routine could be like just getting up at the same time every morning, and, you know, the same routine in the morning that sets your day up right, having things in place like a checklist of like, I'm going to do this, this and this today. And that's probably the biggest thing I've learned about routine. But for yourself, do you use like a routine in terms of, for your like mental performance, in comparison to like obviously the 9 to 5?
Oh yeah, there's absolutely. I mean, you can't really get rid of routine, but it can also be a routine into an ever-changing environment. I would call it, you know. So of course I have my routine. I don't start a day of riding a bike or you know, hiking without my coffee in the morning. That is definitely a routine that I've got there, and I really take my time, and I really enjoy the new scenery that I wake up in every day. You know, having that coffee in the morning, so that gets me started. That is routine in a way, you know. And of course, you know, you have certain goals for the day. Say I want to ride 70Ks today, or 100Ks, or, you know, I want to get there and I want to get this done today. Of course, there is routine in what I'm doing, you know, but it's a routine that, as I was saying, that establishes itself in an ever-changing environment, or in an ever-changing a situation that has a lot of variety in it. So that you know, routine is good as long as it doesn't like make you stuck in a certain environment or in a certain situation. We definitely need routine, but a healthy one, I would say, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's just there, yeah.
So we'll go back as well, because you said as a kid, obviously that sort of adventurous side was always there. You're always wanting to go into the city and what have you. but you then emigrated to Canada at 15, didn't you?
Yeah.
So moving from those home comforts of where grandparents are, where family is, to then the other side of the world to Canada, what were the initial emotions as a kid then? Was that, because I feel like I can guess how you would feel, and that would be just purely excited.
I was excited at the beginning, but I didn't know what it meant to be living in a different country and in a completely different culture, right? So I also happened to be immigrating to Quebec, which has a very unique status within Canada. So you're actually, as a kid, I thought about Canada as being an English-speaking country, very, very much like the U.S. And when I landed in Quebec, I actually had to learn French, and I had to integrate myself in a French-speaking society, which has its own challenges. So on the one hand side, you're immigrating, you're thinking you're immigrating to an English-speaking country, and a culture that is, as I was saying, very similar to the one in the U.S. and the rest of Canada. But actually, Quebec is very different. So it was in a way a challenge, a good one, I would say, because that opened my horizons and opened also my linguistics skills. It upgraded me linguistically speaking. So I learned French. I integrated into French local culture, and in the end, it's the more languages you speak and the more cultures you understand, the better it is. The more complex of a character you become. So that was a good thing in the end, and that opened a lot of possibilities. I don't know. I would probably still be an adventurer, an explorer, even if I would have never left Romania. But I think by immigrating to Canada, that opened a lot more doors and a lot more horizons for me.
I guess, so for example, me, I've been abroad previously. I've travelled and stuff like that. But when I moved here from the UK, understanding the cultural differences in day-to-day life, like when you go and travel somewhere, you kind of, you see bits, but then you move on. You're never really in one place for long enough to see the differences. So it's kind of like being here made me realise there's much more to what I'm used to at home. Like, even though it's two English-speaking countries, it's so different in so many ways. Yeah. So for me, it's a really interesting one, because you've obviously always had that curious side to you where you wanted to see what that more is. But I guess that just brought it out in you probably quicker than what you would have imagined if you'd stayed in Romania. Yeah,
and it also gave me, I had a hard time actually feeling fully Canadian for a long time, and being fully part of that society. And that's another layer of my later travels and my later adventures. Because I think it's a challenge for most immigrants moving from their homeland to a different society, because they might have their reasons to do it, but most of the people that decide to do so, I would say they do it for economical reasons. Just having more opportunities in their new country than in their homeland. So it's a challenge in general. Immigrating and fully accepting and fully feeling part of that society, of that new society that you land in. And that was definitely a challenge for me. And I think my later travels and my later adventures helped me a lot, open up a lot more to just, being that Romanian guy who immigrated with his parents to Canada and settled there. I always felt there's more than just that. Yeah. And you have your own doubts and your own, perception of things. But those all changed. All of these, let's say, negative perceptions and, this difficulty to integrate in the new society all went away when I opened up to the rest of the world. Yeah. And, just going from Alaska to Patagonia and learning an additional 2 new languages, Spanish and Portuguese, and talking to all these peoples and going through all these, just sleeping in strangers' houses and, having all these amazing interactions. You realize all of a sudden that you don't have to be Canadian, you don't have to be Romanian. You're just a world citizen,
Yeah.
So then it all makes sense, It just didn't make sense to me at the beginning, because you come from a very well established identity as Romanian. I went to primary school back in Romania. You get taught some things. You build up a perception about the world and a perception about who you are, and it's just so hard to just change that one to trade it for something else.
Yeah.
At least that was my own experience. But when you open up to a lot more than just two different cultures, I think you can fit into anywhere and everywhere, and that's the good thing about traveling and doing it in a genuine adventurous way where you don't stay in hotels, you have contact with the locals every day, you work with them, you just hang out with them, and you learn from them.
Yeah.
So I think, just to resume it into something more concise, I would say that traveling in general, no matter how you do it, opens you up to the world and opens you up to understand layers or cultural layers, I would call them, that you wouldn't in a situation where you just moved from your homeland to a different one. I don't mean to say that you can do it just by trading a country for another, but it's much easier when you have this big picture coming in, and all of this culture and all of these new languages, and you being open towards them, because you have to be open. You have to be willing to learn and to be challenged. And that's what traveling did to me. And now I really feel like a world citizen. I wouldn't, people call me Romanian. Some people call me Romanian. Some people call me Canadian. I accept both. I'm both. I have two passports. But, in reality, I feel like a world citizen that could fit in anywhere and could be fine living and, living in any part of the world.
Yeah. This idea of, the world citizen is something I really love because, so I'm not sure if you're aware of Yes Theory, which is like a group of people who on YouTube, they basically created this YouTube channel surrounded by the theory of you say yes to something, good things will arise. If you say yes to anything, good things will arise. And there's one guy who runs that channel, and so they originated in Canada, but one of them's Egyptian. And because on, in these imaginary borders that we create, he could not go on most of, I'd say 90% of the trips that they did because his passport was Egyptian. It meant that he was almost instantly refused to travel into most countries because of this ridiculous border system that we do have. Like, in some ways it makes sense, but in ways like that it doesn't, because it, just because you're from a country doesn't mean you fit the ideology of what the world has of that country. And so he was one of the lucky ones where he could go and buy a passport from one of these countries that you can buy into. And I think he spent something like $150,000 on it. But it's not something that people should have to do. If you're Egyptian, if you're Syrian, if you're English, if you're Romanian, we should all have the ability to go and experience other cultures and experience other countries for what they are and what they can offer, because we can all learn from it. And
Absolutely.
I think, with a lot of the problems that are happening in the world right now, is because people don't want to be aware of what actually is possible in other places in the world.
Yeah.
They just think that where they are or what they're doing is the be-all, end-all of what is.
Yeah, it's stereotypes. It's a world of stereotypes. And you see it, well, by spending so much time in nature, I actually get to see a lot of a lot more genuine sides of us and of me and of everything that lives on this planet and exists on it. But as soon as I come back in contact with, Western society and big cities and the mainstream society, those stereotypes pop up, and they pop up into different, very various aspects of everyday life, not just oh, he's an Egyptian and he's this and he's that. We have it, from what we wear to our creeds and beliefs. It's all there. So I think that's another really interesting side of deciding to take all these wild hikes and wild adventures around the world, is that you actually get immersed into different realities. You get to understand things from very different points of view. You just extract yourself from that mainstream society, and then you get exposed to, I wouldn't call them views, but you get exposed to just different aspects of being, of existence, of anything you want to call it, and that sort of like makes you clash back with these stereotypes when you come back in contact with them, because it's just ridiculous, in the end.
Yeah. So we'll go back to when you were in Canada, because on that topic of stereotypes, you initially took the stereotypical sort of 9 to 5 office route, in terms of you went to university, you did software engineering, graduated, were on the route to a 9 to 5 job. So why did you not take that route? Why did you take the leap to go and travel and adventure?
So back in 2013, I was part of a movement. So that was 2 years prior to me graduating software engineering at McGill University in Montreal. So that summer, I had been a student. I've done like a student exchange in Copenhagen in Denmark, and I met this other fellow Romanian student there, who was leading a protest opposing a gold mine in Romania. And he had done a bike trip back in 2012 from Copenhagen to Roșia Montana is the name of the place where they where a Canadian company actually was thinking about building a mine and destroying all the cultural things around there, because that area had been mined by the Romans over 2,000 years ago, and there's all these historical galleries that they would blow up, and they would build these huge pits to extract in a massive, inhumane way all the gold there. So all of the local history would get erased, and that was just horrible. So he took that trip the previous year, and he wanted to do it again in 2013. So I thought about joining him for the cause, and I rallied 2 other friends of mine, and we did this trip through Scandinavia and parts of Eastern Europe that was just an eye opener for me what bike touring and adventure cycling means, because prior to that I had been doing other trips like hitchhiking across Europe and taking trains and doing all these other smaller trips especially in Europe, because I would spend most of the summers in Romania. So I was doing things around Romania, and that 2013 trip was an eye opener. And I still had 2 years left to graduate. Went back to Canada after that, and 2015 comes. That's the year when I'm about to graduate. At the time, I was thinking of marrying a girl. That thing didn't work out. And when that thing didn't work out, I came back to the idea of bike touring, seeing more of the world. And I thought at the time, what would be the craziest bike ride that you can do around the world? Cycling the Americas from top to bottom. I had been watching this documentary of Mark Beaumont a Scottish guy who smashed twice the world record of going around the world on a bike, and he did the Americas as well back in 2009, and I thought that was cool. I thought, man, if there would be something big that I wanted to do on a bike, that would be cycling the Americas from top to bottom. So there you go. It's January of 2015. My marriage plans don't work out. I'm about to graduate in a few months. So I think that's it. I will be cycling the Americas. And that's the moment when I start announcing what I want to do on my Facebook page and starting preparing the trip, So it was basically a combination of different reasons, but the most important one being that I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to see the world, and I wanted to challenge myself, see if I'm capable to ride all these big miles, and go through all these wild areas, where people scare you of, being attacked by bears and pumas and jaguars and cougars and you name it. We grow up as a society with all these fears, and not knowing if you're capable to take such a huge challenge, And on the other hand, I wasn't really seeing myself working in an office 9 to 5, so I didn't really want to take a job and just grow in a company. I'm a very motivated person, but at the same time, I'm very independent, so I didn't really think at the time that I would be a good fit into an office, into an established, environment sort of thing. So here we go, I slowly start, writing emails and trying to gather a few sponsors and trying to see how would that work,
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to go, on a 2-month bike journey around Europe, around Scandinavia and in Eastern Europe. It's nice and it's easy, but it's a completely different thing about thinking of riding the Americas from top to bottom. And there's not a lot of information that you can find about it. You can just, you can probably know about 5-10% of what's to come. You can, take a look at the, at the map and roughly throw a line through it. But you don't really know what's out there. And there's plenty of aspects that come into play. There's also the stereotypes. Again, we're talking about stereotypes, right? So you start telling people around that you're gonna cycle the Americas and you're gonna cycle across a really dangerous terrain like northern Mexico or the Central American countries or Venezuela or Colombia. When you say that to the regular Joe that lives in a city, he's gonna be like, wow, you're crazy, man. I had a lot of support at the time from my godmother, who's been a mentor for me all throughout my my adolescence and my years in my early years in university. It's a great friend of mine, and she baptized me, so she's my godmother, Georgiana, and she was very supportive of my trip, but she also raised concerns about me going through all these regions, just like my parents did, and so on and so forth, But, you have to tell yourself, is that what you really want to do? Go for it. If 5, 10, 15, let's say 20%, you can't really know more than 20% of what's to come. You just have to go with it and have faith in yourself and have, curiosity. You got to arm yourself with a lot of curiosity and with a lot of openness to take on new challenges, because that's what such a huge journey is all about. Being willing to take new challenges, and just being open to be out there and solving problems. It's also about solving problems. How do I get from there to there? What's the best route? What are the challenges of me going through there? So you have to figure all that, but you don't have to figure it out at the beginning, because that's what people ask me, is like, how do you plan for such a trip?
I don't think
you don't really do. I mean, what your objective is. And you have to have an objective. I strongly believe in having an objective. It's not the main thing. The main thing is the trip and those challenges that come
Yeah.
on those years that you're going to spend on the road. But having an objective, having a goal, whatever you want to call it, objective, goal, it's the structure that allows you to have all these experiences, So I had a strong goal. I wanted to cycle the Americas, and that was there from the very beginning. I wanted to get from the top to the bottom of the Americas. A lot of things change during the trip. But that goal is very important to me. And it's not, I believe in the goal, and I believe in you being flexible. Not about the goal itself, but about how you get to the goal.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, because I was listening to a podcast this morning, and towards the end of it, the host, his name's Ali something, he basically said about a book he'd read, and it was basically the journey versus the destination, and he asked his guest, which side do you prefer, the journey or the destination? So for you, which is it for you? Is it journey or destination?
Absolutely the journey, but the journey doesn't, or I wouldn't say it doesn't exist, but doesn't fully come into existence without the destination. That would be my definition. I would use both, the destination and the journey. But of course, the journey is the most important one. The destination is only there to guide you through that journey. That's all there is. That's the goal. So I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to get from that horse all the way down to Ushuaia. I actually got further south than Ushuaia, but Ushuaia was my goal. And I thought back in 2015 when I was planning that adventure, I thought it would take me 9 months, and I would cover only 24,000 kilometers. And in the end, I covered a lot more miles than that, and I spent a lot more time on the road, allowing myself to be flexible and to add different other challenges to my trip, and see more than what I set out to, and do more than I set out to. And that was very nice, in the end. I definitely spent more time in that trip than I planned for, but it was worth it, in the end.
So obviously a journey like that isn't a linear path, and it's evident in the fact that you planned for 9 months and you were there for 3 years, 3 months. So it's what I'm interested in with that is the mental side of it. So for you, when you're a year and a half into this expedition and the end still isn't in sight, are you okay with that? Because a lot of people, when they set themselves goals, are not okay, where it's usually around that halfway point. It's quite tough and quite, you have to be very resilient and to keep going. So for you, were you okay with the fact that you still had all this time left to go?
So I think my adventure across the Americas started as, because you don't really, when you haven't done anything like that, anything big like that, you don't know how to go about it.
Yeah.
I started off as thinking like, I'm a cyclist, so I have to do all these miles that I set out to do every day, and I have to cover all this distance, and that builds up and builds up as a burden, in the end, you have to deliver, sort of, But what's interesting is that slowly but surely the adventure switched from, all these goal-oriented adventure to more like a lifestyle adventure.
Yeah.
So it slowly shifted into that, and that is probably what allowed me to be so comfortable spending all those years solo, riding my bike across the Americas, across both North and South America, because my journey started in August of 2015 at the top of Alaska, very close to the Arctic Ocean in that horse. And, on the one hand, it was good to be there and be riding the Dalton Highway, a very remote road in Alaska at the beginning of August, because the flies were gone. The mosquitoes, the mosquitoes is a real problem in summertime, not the flies, the mosquitoes, sorry, in Alaska, and they were gone. The temperatures were beautiful. I had anything between 0 degrees and 20 degrees, and that's just beautiful, beautiful temperature to ride your bike in. And the weather was quite good, but that meant that I had to hurry up because the winter was fastly approaching, and I had still thousands of miles to go across the Rocky Mountains in Canada and the US. I had at least 7,000 kilometers to go before I would reach a more friendly latitude, in Mexico. So that put me in a situation where I was literally running away from the bad weather, trying to keep up ahead of the winter, which eventually actually hit me in Montana when I crossed the border back into the lower 48 into the US, But I was lucky in a way to get across Alaska and Canada in relatively good weather. But going across the US for the next 2 months in November and December of 2015 was hell. It was so cold, and I had all these, it was an El Nino year, so they had all these crazy winter storms, snowstorms across the divide, and it was just crazy. I felt like it was never ending, it was quite hard, to get across all North America in winter time. But once I reached the Mexican border, I still kept my goal, I still wanted to reach Ushuaia, but it slowly changed into a lifestyle, or it's probably just me simply getting used to it, getting used to be on the road, because it takes a while to get used to, to be pitching your tent every day and be flexible, where you sleep, what you eat, and what you do every day, But it's also the people I meet, like you cross the border from the US into Mexico, and all of a sudden you're in a different world. Everybody's friendly, everybody's curious about you, they're all, inviting you in their homes and welcoming you, and it's probably all this human warmth that I start feeling, it's not just the ice melting and the winter going away, it's also the people that come into my life, and they're just radiant. They have all this radiant energy, the people of Latin America, and I really started enjoying my journey, I'm now away from anything as bad as the North American winter. Temperatures are friendlier, people are friendlier. I know I have a great journey ahead of me, so I slowly get used to it, and I start liking it so much that I tell myself, oh, why not go there as well? Why not do these extra miles to get there, climb that mountain, see that volcano, and have all these other experiences on the side, So it eventually became a lifestyle, that I got used to, and I started really enjoying,
Yeah.
When I just wanted to add, when I finally got to Ushuaia 3 years later, it almost felt like a mythical place, because I knew that goal was always there. I knew where Ushuaia was. I knew that I was going towards it. But, delaying it so much and taking so much more time on the road, it almost felt like, holy crap, that place actually exists, that I set out to reach, It almost felt like it was something out of the book, out of the books. It almost felt like surreal.
Just a fantasy that's...
Yeah, and it's like, oh, I'm there,
It's something I'm always interested in, is the achievement of goals that people have spent so long trying to get to. So, for example, I think it was Michael Jordan, when he won everything, he was kind of like, well, what now?
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people struggle. I feel like you fit into this bracket of that high performance mindset, and that aspect of you set these massive goals, which for 99% of the population are unachievable. and you set out to achieve them with every bit of your might. But when you reach like Ushuaia, was there almost a, well, what now? What?
There was a now because I met Irina, my current partner. So I knew I wanted to go back to Romania and meet her and spend some time and see, like see what life is. I mean, just experience other aspects of life. It's not just about the adventure. It's not just about the travel. It's not just about setting goals and seeing and exploring wild places. It's also, like probably building a family or being close to someone. A lot of what I see in the adventure travel world is a lot of lone wolves. So I didn't want to, and I mean, I didn't want to, and I didn't see myself as ending up as a lone wolf that spends the rest of his life exploring things on its own. So I wanted to connect with someone, in the end, and probably call it finding love, but yeah. So wouldn't it have been for Irina, I would have just kept going. I was thinking of maybe getting a ride to South Africa and then riding the Atlantic coast of Africa back into Europe. And, I would have probably chosen that path. There was, I didn't really have something to go back to. Some people do. And, they take a crazy journey and they do something nice and then they go back and have a normal life. I didn't want to have a normal life and I didn't have something to go back to up until the moment when I realized there might be something more between me and Irina. She was following my journey at the time, and we were talking for hours on end, and she became a confidant, and stuff like that. And we got really close, and I thought there might be something more, so I went for it. So there was something awaiting me at the end of that journey in the Americas, and yeah, so I went for that, and here we are. We ended up doing that together,
Yeah. So during your trip through the Americas, you were robbed at knife point, if I'm correct, if I've read correctly.
Very correctly.
Yeah. So first of all, explain what happened, how that turned out, and then secondly, when you experience extreme trauma like that in a journey where the end is in sight but not really, how do you get up the next day and continue? Because a lot of people will turn around and go, I'm just going home.
Yeah, so that actually happened about halfway into my journey. I was just about to finish North America. Well, North and Central America. Some people like to call the whole thing North America. Some divide it into North and Central America. Anyways, Panama was the last country of Central America, and I was about to cross into South America to start riding my bike in Colombia, and that just happened. I was relying at the time. You have to know the fact that I left with 900 Canadian dollars in my pocket when I started out to do this journey. So I was relying on people donating me small amounts on my website. I was writing all these stories about where I am, what I'm doing, everything that happens throughout my trip and all the people that I meet. And, and I was very active on social media, on Facebook and especially my blog at the time. And, but I wasn't someone able to afford hotels at the time. So, for example, in the US, I ended up sleeping in a lot of the post offices. I found out that they were actually heated and nobody would come there during nighttime, and I would just put my sleeping bag in there and have a cozy warm night, Whereas in Panama, I found out that you could get hosted for free by the firefighters.
Okay.
So I would rely on, and that actually kept on happening in a lot of other Latin American countries, like in Ecuador. The firefighters it's a volunteer service, so they don't get paid for that, and it almost feels like a hostel that you're going to. They got all these bunk beds and cafeteria and everything, that you can cook, and so it was really nice, and yeah, I mean, like I tried I try to get hosted by the firefighters in Panama City, but being such a big city, they're not so keen to host you because it's a city full of crime. You never know who you're hosting. You know, like the smaller the community, the more trustworthy the people are, and the more open they are to host you. But once you get to such a big city as Panama City, it's, you know, the trust is not there, you know, so they refused me. And at that point, I was looking for a hostel. And as I was looking for a hostel, I actually ended up in one of the most dangerous parts of Panama City. You know, when you say Panama City, a lot of people think about skyscrapers and all these rich Russians that hide their money into obscure banks and funds and um, um, whatever that is, you know, and that is a reality of that city. But the other reality is that more than half of the inhabitants live in like basically just unlivable conditions, very poor neighborhoods, slums basically.
Yeah.
So I ended up in one of these slums, and I'm just riding my bike on that road at night. It was close to midnight, I think. And all of a sudden there's a guy that looks so sketchy that just, you know, crosses my path. And I can see him from far away, you know, and just by the look of it, I knew he was a dangerous person. So I turned around my bike just before I reach him and just pedal as fast as I could away. But he ended up actually stealing one of my panniers where I had all my clothes. You know, all of my clothing was in there, you know. And I got so scared, you know, because I turn around, he just fetches it. And I just stop for a second and I look at him, and he's like, he has this knife on his hand. And he tells me, "Oh, come and get it." And I'm like,
what do you do?
No, I've just got to ride away. And you have to think fast. Like that's like one of those moments when, you know, you have to make up your mind like in a millisecond. And I'm like, yeah, just run away, you know. It's either you fight it or you flight it. I decided to just, you know, pedal as fast as I could. Like just around the corner, I see a police car. I wave them down. They stop. I have a chat about what happened with them, and they're like, "Dude, we're not going there. We're never going there. It's too dangerous for us to go in that corner." So they end up allowing me to sleep on the floor in one of their rooms at the police station, and that was it. Next day, off I went, and I kept going for the next 2 years. For the next well, it was actually more than 2 years that I kept on going after that. That happened in, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in June or July of 2016, and my journey ended in October, November of 2018. You know, and you know, I remember like you feel like shit the next morning. Sorry, but you feel like, you know, whenever you get robbed or whenever something like that happens, you feel like you've done something wrong. So I can feel a bit like what might go through people who get abused or something like that. That's exactly what you feel the next morning, is as if you've done something wrong. And I remember like I got robbed, and that was like the first time I was getting properly robbed, because prior to that I've only been stolen a phone in Mexico. So as I was riding my bike, somebody just picked my phone with my earphones on. So he used actually the cable from the earphones to snap it from me. As I was riding my bike, he followed me on a motorcycle. But there was nothing, you know, compared to that. When you see a guy with a knife, just, you know, it's just so scary and so traumatizing in a way.
Yeah.
And you know, you just feel like you've done something wrong, but then you realize, oh well, I didn't. That just happened, you know. And that's actually part of, you know, you have to, when you take such journeys, you have to actually accept the fact that you might go through some of these, you know,
The traumatizing experiences.
the traumatizing experience. And that wasn't the only one. In French Guyana, that was actually the scariest thing that happened throughout my Americas journey. I had 3 kids surrounding me at nighttime, as the shops it was in Kourou in French Guiana, which is actually a territory of France in South America. And I was in Kourou, just got to just finish my ride for the day. And as I just arrived in the town, I was looking for Wi-Fi, and I was relying on posting about my trip, and I was always looking for places where I could get some free Wi-Fi. And as I was like browsing through my phones, and as notifications were coming in, they just shut the store where I was picking the Wi-Fi from. It was actually a restaurant, sorry. And a couple of minutes later, I see all these kids going up and down the road on their BMX bikes.
Yeah.
And at some point, when everything looks like shot on the road, nobody's around, they surround me, and they first asked me to give them my phone, which I thought I might actually give them because they look quite scary, the kids. They're probably 16, 17-year-old kids,
Okay, yeah.
And then they actually changed their demand to give me everything. They simply told me in French, "Donne-moi tout," which means give me everything. And they pull out a gun. And I just, at that point, I think I got so mad at them asking me everything that I thought I might just, I was willing to risk my life. And I wasn't just, I just got so mad that, they just tried to take advantage of me. And I got so mad about it that I just, I pushed one of them and off I went. And I was literally expecting the bullet to follow me. It never happened. We eventually got to a square that had lights on, and people selling different, food street and stuff. So they disappeared back to where they came from. But that was quite scary. And on the other hand, I wasn't willing to give them everything because I was on a low budget. I wouldn't afford to buy a new bike. And I wouldn't even have where to buy a new bike from. It's so hard to get your hand on a good bike in South America, Later on in my journey, I had my fork. My fork broke, and I had to wait a month to get a new one from my partners in Romania, from Crossbike. And, I knew that, or I felt, you can't really control your emotions when that happened,
Yeah.
But what came out at that very moment was like, oh, they are actually gonna end my trip. That's my lifestyle. That's my adventure. I'm not gonna let you do it,
Yeah,
So
that's like everything at that point.
I'm so attached to my things. I'm so attached to my bike, and I'm usually a person that you just sort of like build a relationship with your gear and your things, So I wasn't willing to give that all up, And I got so mad, and I just ran away, I was like, well, whatever, If the bullet falls, that's it.
Yeah. Fuck. It's such a crazy experience. Like, I can't even. Like, I've been mugged before, and that was bad. But then to be held at knife point and also be held at gunpoint.
Yeah,
it's something I can't even imagine, because I remember when I got mugged, that feeling of like you wake up the next day, you feel like shit. There's just like, you don't want to start your day, you don't want to go and do anything.
Yeah.
And then, just on another level, I feel like there must be some sort of adrenal fatigue after that.
Yeah.
Because with that, it's like, but there's a moment where your life could just be
the second time around, after what had happened in Panama and now in French Guiana, I was ready to take a different approach the next morning. So I took out my phone and I wrote a lengthy post of what happened on Facebook, which I didn't do after what happened in Panama. So, you sort of like build accustomed to those things, and then you know how to deal with them much better than when they come around for the second or third time, or, when they come around the next time,
Yeah.
But that's not the only danger I went through. So there's this sort of like human interactions, or human dangers, but there's also the natural dangers that come into play in such a in such a lengthy adventure. And I had a moment in Bolivia where I thought I might die.
Coming up in part 2 of the Real Lives podcast with Radu Paltineanu.
I was just crossing between 5,900 and 6,000 meters of altitude, and I got caught in this massive snowstorm with lightning and thunder and you name it around me, and there's nowhere to hide. There's no rocks, no shelter, no nothing. You're just so exposed. You're facing death. It's the adrenaline of the unknown that keeps you going and keeps you curious and keeps you motivated about taking these adventures. Your wheel is rolling and you don't know what's awaiting for you around the corner.
Just before you leave, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Radu Paltineanu, part 1. Part 2 is coming next Monday at 6 a.m. GMT, 3 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So please remember to like, subscribe, share the podcast with anyone who may be interested. Really appreciate all the support, and I'll see you next week for another video.